Okay, welcome everyone to the latest edition of Ed Talks, the podcast. And today, I think we have a slightly more serious bent with what we're doing because some of you will have heard of a application called what3words. Now, a lot of us are sort of familiar with Apple Maps, Google Maps, Google Pins, all this sort of stuff. But what3words is a very different way of identifying more or less exactly where you are by, believe it or not, dividing the entire world up into 3 metre squares and giving each of those squares a name. So I'm joined today by Galdino-Glaeser, who is let me get you to introduce yourself, Lewis, and you can explain exactly what you do for what3words.
Thank you, Raj. Ed, it's a pleasure to be here. And amazing, you got my name exactly right, the Galdino-Glaeser. So I work for what3words. I'm in their partnerships team. That means I'm looking after all the organizations, companies, individuals that use what3words in their daily lives. And specifically, the reason I'm here is because over the last year, I've been helping a lot of estate agents, a lot of people in the property industry to make the best use of what3words.
Okay, so it'll become a little bit clearer, I think, the advantage of what3words. If you could explain how it started and why it started, because you told me this recently and I found it absolutely fascinating, and it made perfect sense to me.
Of course. So our founder, Chris Sheldrick, in 2013 was working in the music industry, and he was actually faced with the pleasure and the trouble of getting musicians, technicians to big concert venues, big music venues. And if you think about those are massive, massive buildings. You probably have a visitor entrance, but you also have lots of backstage entrances, lots of different places where you'd want the drum boxes, the equipment, the sound systems to arrive at. And he was faced with the issue that those things didn't always end up at the right place. So he thought about, well, how can I tell my teams where exactly to deliver the equipment to? And one way that he came up with was, why don't I use coordinates? They describe every single place in the world super accurately. And, everyone is familiar, well, most people are familiar with coordinates. The trouble is, coordinates are not very easy to communicate human to human. If I told you today, meet me at 52.3521, and so on, we probably wouldn't have met. So instead, what he came up with a mathematician friend of his was a way to, as you described, to divide the world into 57 trillion squares of 3 by 3 meters each, and give each of them a unique code of 3 words. So if I told you to meet me at filled count soap, that's much easier for you to remember and eventually to use and navigate to.
57 trillion, that sounds about the same as the US national debt, probably. But anyway, it's an enormous number. It really is. I've come across it because I've mostly heard about it in the emergency services. And for obviously for the emergency services, it's incredibly useful. I myself now know what my front door is. If I'm going to give people doing deliveries down in the country, I can give them it just makes perfect sense to me. And the reason that we are talking, apart from the fact that I think that what3words is a very useful adjunct for the property industry, which we'll come to in a minute, is that, as some listeners may know, we launched something called the ViewBuddy app. It's a thing. I was an estate agent. I started actually in the late 70s, but in the mid 80s, 1986, a lady called Susie Lamplugh disappeared on a viewing and has never been heard from since. And I'm amazed, really, that the industry hasn't. I'm sure lots of things have been done to try and help. The advent of mobile phones, emergency passwords, etc., have been very, very useful. And have definitely moved the game on a bit. But we at ViewBuddy, our business is to do viewings. So a lot of our ViewBuddy members go out and do viewings. Most of them are on their own. So we wanted to do something which made it a bit safer, something that helped them feel just a little bit safer. So what we've done is simply develop an app where the person doing the viewing can put in a couple of buddies. It could be people they work with, could be partners, whatever it is. And this doesn't have to be just for property. It could be anything, but we've set it up for property. And then when they go into the viewing, they can set a time for when they're going in. If they've overshot and the buddies haven't had the email, or they get an email saying this person hasn't signed out at the right time, they then have the opportunity to call the person and say, are you okay? And equally, even if they haven't set some buddies up when they go into the viewing, if they enter their passcode for the app in reverse, it sends out an emergency silent alarm to their buddies so they can do something about it. And obviously the kicker for us, and why I'm talking to you, is that it gives a what3words location as to exactly where they are, which is incredibly important and very useful. So when we started talking about it, we worked out that there was plenty of synergy there for us. The ViewBuddy app uses what3words. I'm happy, very happy that you got in touch to say, listen, we like this. We'd like to talk more about it. But what you mentioned with the music industry and Chris, the founder, in terms of finding out which gate to drop off stuff, stuff for the concerts, makes perfect sense. Because, for instance, for me with rural properties, with Viewer, quite a lot of our viewings or our Viewer members pick up stuff via key safes, for instance. Now, if you're going to a very rural property, which could have several acres of land, a Google pin isn't much use because it'll just identify where the property is, not where something is specifically. And the idea that you can simply zero into a 3 metre square makes an enormous difference. You can see exactly where the key safe is. I mean, from your point of view, give me some idea of the experiences that you've had with estate agents so far in terms of trying to get it introduced. Have you had much success to date?
Yes, I think so. It's definitely been quite a learning journey for me, but also for our company. None of us have any background in property or in estate agency. So when I joined about a year and a half ago, my CCO Claire said, Louis, we see a lot of agents use what3words manually. We see those listings come through on the internet. Can you find out how they're using it? Is it helpful? Can we as a company do something to make it easier for them to use? So I started out just calling up, messaging agents across the country who were using what3words already to say, hey, you're using it. We love that you're using it. Is it helpful? Does it help you save time? Does it help you provide a better client experience? Because now the customer comes to the right place first time around. That first experience of viewing a property, I think, is really important. And you're right. It was mainly rural properties. So rural properties is a very good use case. The pin that lands in a field is the classic I always hear, or, this road actually doesn't have a name, or the house has a name, but it's not based on the numbering. If you want to go to Queenstown Road 366, if you're at Queenstown Road 365, it's okay. You just miss a bit of time, still annoying for the agent. But in a rural place, you get completely lost. So the use case for rural properties is very strong for what3words. But as I started speaking to them, one, obviously they were using it already, so they clearly saw the value. But they often told me, listen, we as estate agents, which our main business is with people. We don't want to deal with all the back end and getting the what3words into our properties. So please help us get the CM systems on board. So that was my second step.
Okay, so for anyone listening to this, they will know that getting anything involved with CRM systems can be a fairly convoluted process, even when the benefits are as obvious, dare I say, for what3words, let alone Viewer. It's been a journey, and it's a journey I hear from suppliers over and over again. And I'm not dissing the CRM systems. A lot of them are legacy systems. They're clearly making big strides towards uprating them and upgrading them and making them more user-friendly and more relevant to the people that want to come and view. And this is one of those classic examples where it very, very clearly is to a buyer or a renter's advantage if they can simply put in what3words into the app or the mobile website, whatever it is, to tell them exactly where to go. That is a huge advantage. You mentioned, I think, when we spoke before, Desres was one of the CRM systems that were very reactive and have integrated. How has the rest of it been with the CRM systems? Would you describe it as slow? Are you making progress?
Yeah, definitely making progress. Slow, yes. But I think you're right. They are reinventing themselves as well. They realize that one size fits all doesn't work anymore. You need to be a bit more nimble. You need to be quicker at adapting, integrating new things. The market moves fast. And I think that's one of the reason why Des was so fast and able to do it in September last year, actually was one of the agents who introduced me to him. So again, it was me speaking to an agent saying, please talk to Des. Spoke to him, and very quickly it was live, because they are building a platform to be as open as possible to new APIs. And similar, yeah, we've integrated with Property Hive, with Acquaint CRM, with Apex 27, and working on all the others as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? One of my pet projects over the years has been to try and find some kind of a universal translator that you could just plug into all of the CRM systems if they wanted to, but sadly it doesn't work like this. And as I said, I do not want to diss any of the CRM systems. I know that they all have their own development roadmaps, they have limited resource, etc., etc. It is just frustrating sometimes. I suppose the good thing for what3words is that the competition is, whilst not out of date or non-existent, who would you say? I mean, I'll give you an example. I was lucky enough, it was my wife's 60th, we went to Italy, got a villa, and it was done by Co-ordinates, first of all. And it was a nightmare because this was done with latitude and longitude, and it's quite difficult. Is it the right format, etc., etc.? It would have been fantastic to have done it via what3words. But who are your competitors really in this arena?
Yeah, very good question. Co-ordinates, you're right. That is probably the closest to competitor there is. Google actually has something called Google Plus Codes, which turns coordinates into an 8-digit, depending on how accurate you want it, different length of code. But it's a combination of letters and numbers. So we think 3words, and for us that actually is great because it shows Google has identified the same pain point of coordinates just don't work when you want to communicate accurate location. So you want something that is a bit shorter, easier to use. We believe 3words are much easier to use than a random combination of numbers and letters. So we think we're the only one out there doing what3words. So. Yeah.
And in terms of white van man out there and all the delivery people, are the delivery companies taking up what3words?
Yes, they are. So that was actually a big, as you can imagine, all our business had to do a little bit of a pivot during COVID. So before COVID, a lot of our main industries used to be automotive, travel. Both of those shut down for about a year. So we did it before already, but we really doubled down on deliveries and courier companies and lots of small, medium-sized companies that do their own deliveries. They love what3words because they are the people that make decisions about what goes on the checkout. So how do you get the through address from the customer? And the same people that do the deliveries, if they feel the pain point, they know it can really help us if Louis can now tell us this is the back door where he'd like to get his groceries delivered. And then last year, Hermes adopted what3words. So every Hermes can now deliver to any what3words address.
That's when they get it right. I don't want to be rude about Hermes, but I think everyone's got a story about Hermes, but that's another story entirely. It's so prevalent, deliveries these days. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that everybody listening should do two things when they listen to this podcast. One is to go and download the what3words app. Is that the easiest way of?
That is the easiest way.
That's the easiest way. And the second thing is to download the ViewBuddy app, obviously, which is our safety for lone workers app. But without being cynical, the what3words app, everyone should really learn their front door, back door, whichever place they want for deliveries or for someone to come, because it's one of those sort of things that if you have an emergency, often it's too late then to sort of refer to the app and whatever. So learning what 3 words are your point of contact does make an enormous difference.
And that's just on that topic, actually, that's one of the beautiful parts about the property integration or adoption of what3words, and it really is starting to become a bit of a standard. You get hundreds of properties every week added to the market with a 3-word address, and it's one about the moment that the agent meets the buyer or the renter for the first time, but then also that buyer renter who ends up living in that house, they already know the 3-word address because that was the first thing they learned or they came to. So yes, as you said, in an emergency, they now know this is the 3-word address I can give, or to a delivery company, I can make sure that my pizza arrives and it's still hot. New builds are actually a really good example of that. And we've recently had something go through on Twitter and on social media about someone who had a condition that basically he had to call the ambulance quite regularly, and living in a new build, he was able to give them the address with the through address. So
yes, because new builds can often be very difficult. Postcodes aren't very accurate. They can have an awful lot of properties within the same postcode.
And they might not be in a map yet. They might not be actually mapped.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So playing devil's advocate here, if I'm being honest, one of the issues I had when I was first trying to use what3words or looking at it was occasionally the spelling. And not everyone... I'm the chief officer for the grammar and spelling police, so I like to try and get most of it right. But I get it wrong, and other people will get it wrong. How much of an issue is misspelling one of the words?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when you use our app, you will notice that we have something called autosuggest. So as you type in an address, it will bring up similarly spelled three-word combinations. And we have shuffled word combinations across the globe. So a three-word address that's similar to another three-word address, so easily to misspell, will be placed as far from each other as possible. So that's completely different to how addressing works. Queen's number 366 is right next to Queen's number 365. Filled count soap will be miles, if not hundreds of miles away from filled count soaps, to exactly make sure that before you go to the property, you notice maybe I've gotten the name slightly wrong, maybe I've misspelled it, and the app will recommend you similar sounding three-word addresses that are closer to where you're currently at.
Okay, that's a really good point. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense, that to know that similar spellings could be on the other side of the globe, literally. Yeah. And in terms of international take-up, I mean, I'm assuming, unless your title is Global Partnerships, I'm assuming you're about the UK.
Yes, so funny enough, UK is still part of my focus, but I'm German. I don't know if it was clear already from my pronunciations, from my accent. But I'm also covering the German market. So I'm actually now focusing very much on the German-speaking market. It's Germany, Austria, Switzerland.
And what is take-up like outside your patches? So, the rest of the EU, the world. Yeah. I mean, how is it looking?
Yeah, I mean, we're live with some kind of integration in more than 170 countries, thousands of organizations.
How many countries are there in the world? It's about 194?
194, I think. Yeah. So it's
quite a lot.
You can use it. And I mean, we're live in 48 languages. So our goal is to become a global standard. So everyone should be able to use what3words in their...
Are all the words English?
No. So there is one version of what3words that's completely English, covering the whole globe. But there's 47 other versions of what3words in different languages.
Wow. So I hadn't even thought about that, actually.
So if you go on the map, or if you go on the app, you can add a second language. So say you're in Germany and you want to have English and German being displayed at the same time. That's how I usually get around.
Yeah, well, it makes perfect sense. Why not? Why not use your own product? Yeah. And as we're sitting here, I mean, I think from our point of view, for our viewers, I think that is something we will be working to. It is already something we're working to introduce to use what3words locations for key safes, for where people pick up keys, where they have to drop keys back, etc., etc. And so, what other uses would you see for what3words in the property industry? Are there any other ones that we haven't talked about?
Yes. So actually, this was a funny one. As Desiree was building their integration, we always talked about the front entrance. Where do you want to meet the potential viewer, the buyer, the renter? And that was the main use case. But I think as they started building it, they got some customers in, so some agents of theirs in to look at it. And they had the idea, what's another really annoying use case where I need to be very accurate telling someone where to put something? Sales boards. Where exactly should a sales board be put on a property or maybe on the street? So they now have a function you can specify the 3 by 3 meter square where a sales board should come up. And parking, of course. So, especially in the urban space, sometimes the parking might not be exactly at the front entrance of the building. So an agent could say the parking spot is at Baked Became Deck, but the front entrance is at Retail Float Echo.
Yeah, no, I can see that makes perfect sense. There are endless uses for it. I mean, clearly the bit or the use case that's had most publicity is the emergency services, and that makes perfect sense. What is your penetration like into the UK emergency services? Is it now very widely used? Is it universal?
Yeah, we're live with 85% of emergency services. So this was similar to estate agent world. We don't have a background in emergency services. It was by chance that someone was starting to use it already internally for their missions, and then spoke to us and said, "This works really well. Why don't you help us get everyone else set up?" And yeah, we went on, set out, and basically just try to help the emergency service that take the call to, when a 3-word address is given, know what to do with it.
I suppose with the emergency services, at least you have, it may or may not be easy to deal with, but the level at which you deal with people, once someone says, yes, use it, it goes out to everybody. Whereas, of course, you were smiling earlier, which we got a couple of snippets here on video, but a couple of people won't have been able to hear you smiling when talking about estate agents and how easy it is to get into the estate agency world. And having been part of the estate agency world for over 40 years, I know how difficult it is to get to estate agents. Yeah. There's no one place, at least with the emergency services. If the fire service says, yep, this is great, they can disseminate it. Similarly with the police and with the NHS. I mean, I don't really know. I can see why you moved from individual agents to the CRM systems. That's an obvious leap that most suppliers try and make. Is there any other way that you've tried to get into a state agency?
Yeah, good question. So initially when I looked into the industry and had, 20, 30 chats with different agents across the country, in my naive analysis of the industry, I came up with 3 parts to the puzzle that what3words needs to solve in order to make it easier to use. The one is the agent themselves, of course, who have the pain point and the benefit. Then there's the CM system. And then there's the platforms, the place where a lot of people see a property for the first time. And at the moment, if you go on a platform, you see a listing, you'll see a 3-word address in the middle of a text. It might be slightly hidden. And it might not be under the location information. So what I set out about a year ago was to try to get the portals to identify, recognize when a 3-word address is used, and then bring it up as something slightly more prominent.
And how have those conversations been going?
They have been going, slowly, but there's some exciting announcements coming up. So if you're very curious, you can probably already find 1 or 2 of those out in the wild. So yes, again, it's been quite a humbling experience to really dive into an industry and learn it from scratch. And
well, I shall be interested to see, because certainly the platform, the aggregation part of the industry has been pretty static for a very long time, and you've got the new entrants. Yeah. Obviously on the market, it's not that new, but I think Jason, who's taken over on the market, is much more proactive than the previous management. And I think they've been very upfront about trying to improve the consumer experience. And the consumer these days, estate agents all too often think of the consumer as being the person who pays them, which is the client, the seller, when actually the consumer is obviously the buyer or the renter. And I think on the market is doing more and more to appeal to those people, which then makes their portal more accessible. Rightmove clearly has a dominant position, but I think a lot of people in the industry they're clearly very cynical about Rightmove. And that it's a sort of money-making machine. But how the adoption of new technology there is going is very, it's been obfuscated. We can't really see it very well. Zoopla clearly, I think, is trying to focus, perhaps I might have got this wrong, and I'm sure someone will listen to this and tell me I'm wrong, but they've been focusing more on their CRM side rather than necessarily the portal side. Yeah. And obviously they've been taken over and privatized, so it's more difficult to find out exactly what they're doing. And then you've got Boomin and Home Search and some of the other sort of portal stroke data companies out there. I mean, to me, it would seem obvious that if you're doing a listing, the clearest and easiest way for people to be able to find exactly where they need to go to is with what3words. My business partner, funnily enough, has always been a little bit, not cynical, it's completely the wrong word, but he's always been an Android fan, and he likes Google Pins and says, what's wrong with Google Pins? And I use Google Pins a lot, I have to say. Yeah. But I just think the universal nature of what3words and simply putting those words into an app, again, I worry a little bit about the spelling thing, but you've dispelled some of that concern a little bit, which I think is very useful. I'm acutely aware that we've really been through, I think, most of what we need to talk about. Is there anything that you would like to let the property industry know about with what3words that we haven't spoken about so far?
Yes, there is actually, because a year ago I set out by myself and I started talking to lots of agents. I'm very grateful for all the insights and advice I got back then. And for us at what3words, that was about figuring out, is this an actual use case? Is this a pain point that we can solve? And if it is, how can we help the industry adopt it more easily? And of course, one of the things was to go to all the CM systems, to convince them that this is a valuable feature for their clients. But the other thing we've done is actually on our website, we now have a communications hub or an integrations hub. So agents, even an individual agent who might be using what3words by themselves in their property descriptions, can go there and grab lots of easy explainer materials, promo materials, just things that make it easier to talk about what3words to their customers and clients. So I would definitely encourage everyone to check that out. It describes the use case a bit more. It also just gives you a bit of materials to hand to make it easy to communicate, even to share things on social. It is always a nice thing. It's quite a graphic, visual, appealing.
Okay. And what's the website they need to go to do that?
It's on our website, and then there's. It's a URL. I can send it, but it's on our website, what3words.com, and then there's a you can click through to.
And what3words is all letters, is it?
No, it's what3words.
What3words.com.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly. But yeah, and yeah, it's just on pins. I think what you said. If a pin can be shared, that's perfect. Then you don't really need what3words, because there's no communication happening between device and human or human to human. If one device communicates with another device, a pin or coordinates are perfectly simple and easy to send, and we don't want to get involved there. what3words adds that human element to it whenever you have to transfer an accurate location from one device to another. And I think the example that always resonates with me quite nicely is, what if your agent sends you the through address, you look at it on your phone, but you then want to type it into your car navigation system. And this is one of the areas we integrate a lot with. So Mercedes-Benz lets you type in 3 words into their navigation system, and it takes you straight to that pin or to that coordinate. So it's always about human-friendly communication. That's where what3words comes into play.
Yeah. Well, listen, I've been very I've followed it with interest. It's very clear, because of the emergency services take up, how important it is, and how useful it is. And I think you've really beautifully explained some of the benefits for the property industry, and I think the human element of this is really important. So I would like to say, obviously you heard, listeners, what3words.com. If you're an agent and you want to go and what3words.com, if you want to go and have a look at some of the material that Lewis was talking about, that's the place to go and get it. Obviously, the reason that View came across it was when we were producing our ViewBuddy app. It uses what3words to tell buddies or contacts where the person who's having the problems is, and we found it very useful from that point of view. So please do go and download it if you'd like a little bit of extra safety when you're out and about on doing single viewings. And in the meantime, I think we've taken up plenty of people's time. So thank you very much for listening. And Lewis, thank you very much indeed for coming along and talking on the latest Ed Talks podcast.
Thank you very much, Ed. It was an absolute pleasure.